on Mongoose with Nodejs. I mean, we are going to use a Mongo DB as a database and Mongoose as a ORM and Nodejs to write the APIs. Okay, so Mongo DB is a non-relational, or you can say a NoSQL database we have in our system. Like we talk about Postgres, MySQL, those has some kind of a structure defined, some kind of a schema defined for those tables. They have their relationships. But when we talk about MongoDB, it's a schema-less. It's a NoSQL database. It's just storing the documents inside its collections, like user collection, student collection. Those collections are going to have just a document, and it just add a underscore ID as a unique identifier for each and every document. It's just a matter that we can have some kind of a structured data around it using some wrappers. Like we can use a Mongoose to structure the data, to add the validation before saving that data from Nodejs APIs to MongoDB. So Mongoose is used, the latest version of Mongoose has the latest updates, and it has evolved a lot from callback based way of persisting the data to the promises. Now you can use async await and all. So we are going to talk about Node.js with the Mongoose, how it works and how to manage the relationship with Mongoose. So what Mongoose is adding, it's like a ORM layer. You don't need to interact with the MongoDB directly. We have to define a structure. First of all, MongoDB is a schemaless. But for our APIs, we are going to store a structured data. The course collections obviously need to have the data related to only course. It can have some kind of a relationship with a student, one to many, many to many, or one to one, right? All these kind of relationships you can't define in MongoDB database. But there is something like on the Mongoose layer, we can define some kind of a structure and all this kind of relationship to populate the data and to insert the data. So Mongoose is providing just a schema model object using which we will access the data, we will persist the data. But it's not applying all those kind of relationships on the database layer. MongoDB is still schemaless. If you are interacting directly with the MongoDB, you can just play around with the data. It's a schemaless. You can insert any kind of data on your documents. But what we are doing is we are not interacting with MongoDB NoSQL directly. We are using Mongoose, and at the layer of Mongoose, we are defining some kind of a validation rule, defining the structure of the schema models, using which we are able to store only structured data for our needs. Okay, installation is simple. It's coming with the as an npm module, so you can require it and you can use it. Okay, so like all these kind of ORMs, what they are providing us a structured way of defining a schema model, right? So here we can say that user is a schema. User schema is going to create a user collection in MongoDB, and what all attributes it is going to have. Those kind of validation rule we are going to define in a Mongoose model. We are calling that as a Mongoose model, like username is a string, required unique should be true. So whenever you are inserting the data into that schema model using Mongoose, it will run all these validation before persisting this data to the MongoDB. Because we are not applying these rules at MongoDB layer, we are applying it at the Mongoose layer. So it will run all these validations and it will give us the data. If you are violating that, it will not allow us to just directly insert the data, because MongoDB is a document based, we can directly access. Okay, so simply how we are going to save a user or save an entity. So we created a models in Mongoose. We will just create a Mongoose connection using mongoose root connect. You can just pass the schema URL, the MongoDB URL. We have already set up all these things with the Docker, that there is a MongoDB container and there is a Node.js container. Node.js will have APIs and Node.js will establish a connection with the MongoDB, right? But when we are going to save it, what we generally do, we create an object of the model and we just do it something like this. This is just a callback way of doing it. Now you can just use new promise.save or user.create pass this object. There are many ways of just creating the entity, right? This is a typical one way. So Mongoose has evolved much with the time. Earlier we used to do a callback way of dealing with the Mongoose. Now then it changed to the promise way of doing it, and now with the async await wrappers you can use it, like user.find. It will give you all the data in the user collection. User.find by ID will give you only those users have matching with this particular ID, right? Okay, so primarily this video I'm creating only to understand these relationships, how the MongoDB collections or a Mongoose collections manages all these kind of relationships, which can be one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. These are the common concepts which exist anywhere. Like you talk about RDBMS like MySQL, Postgres and all. You use any kind of ORM with the Nodejs with this MySQL. There also you will deal with these three different kind of relationship where you wanted to define a relationship between two entities. There we will be using primary key, foreign key or surrogate key and all these different kind of concepts. Like you might be creating composite key to define a constraint with the two different entities. But here with the Mongoose we don't have all these concepts. So how do we manage all these relationships with the SQL based NoSQL based database, okay, and with this Mongoose ORM? So there is always a confusion around how we actually manage this. So video is targeting only that, okay. So first in this video we are going to talk about one-to-one. One-to-one means client will have a customer, customer belongs to a client, okay. Another example is user has a profile and profile belongs to a single user. It is one-to-one mapping, okay. One belongs to one, one is associated one, and then one belongs to one, right? One is to one relationship. Like customer has only one client belongs to only one customer. So in the case of one-to-one relationship, how we can store this kind of a data, how to architect, or you can say how to define our schema model in MongoDB so that we can manage this information. So there are always a different ways of doing it. Either you can use embedding two documents or having two different references, okay. So this is like you can say denormalization approach. What we are doing is we are actually creating references. This is normalization. You created a customer as a different reference, or you created an identifier as a different reference, because this is again going to have some ID, and then you are embedding it, okay. Or you can have these all two schema models separate. This is having its own collection, it is having its own collection. You might be having like some identifier common, like customer ID is here. This can be the object ID. So this customer is a separate schema model, but this ID you will be passing here as a customer ID. So client will have relationship with the customer in the form of customer ID. Okay, this is called a reference, and this is called the embedded way of doing the relationships, one is to one. Okay, this we can just look into the different examples in the form of code. Like okay, here we will take a look on little code. First of all, I will try to explain what we are doing in this repository. This is already shared in my blogs. There is a blog repository, tksarma.com/blog, okay. So here we just have a simple, nice looking setup with the Docker Compose. We have a MongoDB container, and we have a Nodejs container and MongoDB container here. Nodejs depends on MongoDB. MongoDB just spinning up the container, and in the env file we are just passing a MongoDB port is 3000, environment is development, okay. It's just a basic Express JS MVC application. I didn't use any TypeScript just to not to make it complex, just for demo. It's just a simple MVC application where we have a model, controllers and routes. From routes we are going to the controllers. Controllers will deal with the models data. Models are nothing but a Mongoose representation, okay. So first of all we'll take a look on one-to-one relationships, okay, like client and customer. So how we are going to store using reference, like here the reference store is. This is the client document, client collection document, and here we are going to manage the customer ID as object ID. This is a way of storing using a reference ID, okay. Another way is embedding the document, where you have a client document and you put all the details of customer. So in this case, customer is not a separate collection. You are using customer as a key, as a property inside the client document. You can't get a customers as a totally different customers list. Like if you wanted to get a customer list, you can't get it, because customer is nothing but just a property inside the client collection, okay. But here customer will be having a separate collection, okay. You defined a customer model, and you're just using a reference to associate customer with this client, okay. Now how we do it in the schema model approach, like what we have to write it, so that we have to define while defining a schema, okay. So schema definition is some kind of a simple. I will try to explain it in a little nicer way. I hope that can help you. So consider that this is my simple, what you can say, customer model, client model. This is how we define the schemas in Mongoose. So I'm creating a Mongoose schema. Then later I will just register this Mongoose schema with my model. Okay, so here it will be a client, and this is the client schema I have. Now to have a one-to-one relationship, I just need to provide that object. Okay, like customer will be an object. If you want to have one-to-many, then the scenario will be different because this client can have many customers. Then you will be wrapping it around inside an array. Okay, and here what we are saying, okay, this client will have a array of customers, and then you will just keep pushing the customers one by one. But here scenario is different. We are having only one client is having only one customer, and one client is having only one vendor. Like you can have associations with multiple collections, right? One is to one with the customer, one is to one with the vendor. And how we define relationships, we represent it as an object, and you just need to provide a reference of that collection. So there is another schema model we have as a vendor somewhere down the line. Like I have a vendor model, and here this model is vendor schema, let's call it anything you like. And it doesn't now you don't need to define any relationship here. It is a vendor. Okay, this vendor is having 1:1 relationship with the client. Okay, this is the vendor. So we are going to create vendor as a separate. You are going to create a vendor schema as a separate. You are going to create a collection in vendor separately. Now once vendor is created, you can embed that vendor while creating the client. Okay, so what are different ways, I mean, we create a particular entity. If we just take a look on to a different examples, like I imported this particular model like client, and this is a schema model. So consider this is my client JS, okay, which I have imported here. So what I'm doing, I'm importing a client model. Okay, what I got is client model representation from here. Now what all things can do, I will be writing some controller, like you got the request into the routes, and you got the request into the controller. Now this controller will have some method like async create client. First let's create a vendor. So here you might be getting a request and response, right? So consider that you got some data const, you can say vendor a request.body. I mean request.body is having a plain object which you directly got. Now using just async await, what you can do is return I got the vendor model vendor.create, and you can just pass this vendor. So what it is going to do, it is going to create me a vendor. Let's keep it simple. I got the vendor object now. Okay, now consider that I have a two properties. Let's get the two properties vendor, and we have a client. Both payload are coming just for an example. So I created a vendor first. I got the vendor now. Now what I will do is I can create a client. Client can also be created in the same way, right? You got the client data. So what you can do is, first of all, you have to set client.customer, right? We have to set client.customer. So client.customer you can set equal to new vendor. Sorry, client.vendor we can set new vendor dot id. It should be object id, right? Now what you can do is you can save the client. client.create, and you can pass the client object, and you can wrap it around try catch if you want, because we are using async await and there can be a chance that it is going to return an exception. And you can do next error, something like this. Or if you wanted to create an embedded object, then you can just create a vendor and just assign the whole object to a client. Client.vendor equal to that same the big object where you define all the properties. It is simple, right? You are just assigning the properties. So if we just look at the code, here we have created a client and here we have created a customer, right? Now in the actual code when we start writing it, so I mean this is just an example, client customer is to 1:1, but in the code which I already have, we already have a 1:1 relationship with one book will have a one author. Consider that we have created a scenario that a book can't have more than one author and there is a 1:1 relationship already exists. So if you talk about book is having this author relationship object ID and it is references author, means book has one author and author belongs to a book. It is a 1:1 relationship. If you go to author doesn't have any reference of book because we have already defined the reference of author into the book. Now while creating a book or creating an author can be created independently. Now while creating a book I need to pass author ID in the book. Like while creating a book I need to pass the author as an object ID. So I can just simply write the routes. So here I have authors and I have a create author. Okay, create author will be straightforward because we are not defining any relationships here. So if you just do a try catch, so it is a simple example what we are doing. And here let's see, we got the data from request.body. This data we are just going to just persist, right? So here I have author. I just need to get the model author.create. This method is available and you just need to pass the data which you got, right? So what it will do is it is going to create an author for us, and what we can do is response.send. We got the author. Okay, so create author. This will works fine because we are just we are sending the payload and we are able to create author. Now while creating the book, we have to somehow pass the author ID because we are going to create a book which should have some author, right? So create a book, right? Request.body. So what the body will have, body, in the body you have to pass the author. So the simple payload can be, sample payload for this can be let's check what book model is having. Book model is having title, subtitle and author, right? And text is another thing which we'll talk about. So it can be having a simple JSON object. Title something, then we have subtitle, and we have an author. Author should have an object ID, okay, ID which we have created. So in the routes we have to provide that ID, or in the payload you have to provide that ID, something which is a 64 character object ID, right? Now while getting this, we got some data for the book in the payload. Now we just need to validate, are we passing the correct object ID in the payload? If not, just throw the exception, otherwise create the book. So we have populated the book with the author information. So while saving it, it will have the author ID. It will have the author ID in its record. So we are actually defined the relationship of book with the author is a 1:1. Now populating either author or a book, you can just populate the information. Okay, like if I wanted to get the book information using get request book controller, you can populate it something like this. Await book is the model.find populate author. I also have another relationship tags for a particular book, so I will be able to populate it. So what it will do, it will populate the book information with the author or the text both. right? Similarly, the author controller, for a particular author information, now you can also get the book's information. It will come as a nested object of the author, right? So the advantage of it, while defining the relationships as a reference, both will be a separate document. You can query both the document, and both will have their own individual IDs. So you can query and you can define the associations. But there is case to case, it depends. Do you want it? Do you not want it? Is it fine to have an embedded document? But it's always better to have a reference, because you will be able to separately query them. Okay, so we talk about both the things. Normalization means where you are having two different collections and just defining the relationships using this object ID, or embedded, where you are embedding both the collections. Okay, this can be a simple example, and we can just test it using this particular code. Here in one particular case, we are having embedded object whole. Another case, we are just having the ID of that particular customer. Okay, so in the next video, what we can do is we can talk more about one-is-to-many relationship, what all the possible ways of achieving it, right? So in this case, we just talk about how we can embed an object, like how client can have a customer, or how client can have just a customer ID, and then you can fetch it. Okay, so other thing is this populate. If you have defined the relationship like here in that book, I have defined as author, and I already have that, like this book is having author ID in this author column. So while getting this, you can just populate the information about that. Okay, and you can also just remove the attributes like underscore view or ID. If you wanted to remove them, you will be able to do it. So this is just a plain one-is-to-one relationship, and here you can just query it something like this. You will get the data, and here we are just passing. First, we are creating the first entity, then we are just passing the ID of that entity created. Either you can pass that ID as a request param, or in the request body. I choose the body. First, we are validating that should be a valid object ID. If not, then obviously you are just passing the dummy author ID. Okay, so what we will do in the next video, we will talk about one-is-to-many relationship, and we'll explore more. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the second part of that webinar, where we are talking about Node.js for the Mongo DB. And in this particular video, we are going ahead with another relationships, which is one-is-to-many. So in the previous video, which I already added a link in the video description, there you can take a look. So this is the second part of the same video, and here we are going to talk about one-is-to-many relationship. Okay, in this one-is-to-many relationship, there can be many options. Okay, like we have one blog is having few images, one blog has many comments, and there are many categories for a particular blocks, right? One is to a lot, one is to many, or one is to few. Because at the runtime, we can decide what kind of strategy we wanted to use for these kind of relationship, like embedded relationship or the referential relationship. Referential relationship where you have to manage a separate document, and in the embedded relationship, you don't need to create a separate document. You just embed one document into another document. Okay, let's see the blog and image example. If you just see blog and image example, here we have created a blog. So one way is to do it. You can create an embedded relationship where you will create a one blog, and it will have like many comments, right? But here you are not creating the comment IDs separately. I mean, you are not creating any comment collection. You are just keep embedding the new comments in a particular array, attribute array. So comment is having the array. So you can keep pushing the new comments coming for this particular blog 01. Okay, so this is called embedding style. So you can decide if you don't have many records like blog with images. A blog will have a limited number of images to be shown as a placeholder. So there you can decide of having this embedded approach. But like blog is going to have many comments. It can be having 100 to 150 comments. Then it's better to create and split them into a different reference. So blog can be will be a separate document. Here in the comments, you will just manage the document IDs of an individual comment. So this is a comment 1, this is a comment 2, the username, text, descriptions, and feedback, all these columns, and you will be just providing the IDs of those particular record or documents in the comments. So these are the two different ways of achieving this. Okay, so in the relationship, how we can do it, let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look onto the blog and comment example. So what we can do is we can just create a simple model, one is to many. Okay, like this is my blog. Blog model is nothing but a title, author, image. So first we will try to do the embedded way of doing it, where blog can have many images. Just embedded way of doing it, we just keep pushing the set of image objects inside this image array instead of creating image as a separate document collection. Okay, so if we just start writing the routes for it, like we can just create blog route. I can have these separate routes for it. So when you do blog, I will just have a create get all blogs. And here we can create a blog. And this will be another controller like blog controller. We are just adopting a simple MVC approach. Okay, let's directly jump into our controllers to write the code. This is my blog controller, and I have already shown how the blog model look like. Okay, this is simple blog model. Currently, I don't need a image model because I'm going to embed it all the images in this particular blog. So in the blog controller, I will just use first I will create a blog, because one is to many entities, one is to many relationship. First we have to first entity. So blog we can just create. I can just use this method, copy paste. So it can be create blog. Okay, in the request body I'm getting it. So const blog, I'm getting it in the request body, what I'm going to create. Okay, and what I can do is, so it is just going to create a blog without images, like a empty image array. So we can just do const new blog equal to await, and here we can say blog.create. Blog will be a schema model, and here we'll create a blog.create. I think this is not imported from the model, so that's not coming up here. Okay, we created in a different location, so I will just drag it here. Okay, we imported a blog here, so if we can access that object in our blog controller, blog.find, now I'm able to access, blog.create I'm able to access, and it will accept only the entity. Okay, so this simple method will, what it will do, it will just create a blog. Now we can create another method, is update blog with images. Sorry for the typos. Okay, now in this, what we are going to do, we already have a blog created, so we might be getting a blog ID. Okay, and we will be getting an image object which we are going to insert. So first we have a blog ID, so we can just use find by ID and update on the blog, because we are going to update the blog object and we are going to insert this new image. So I have already done this set of things on my book controller, so I will try to use that piece of code. I will explain it what we are doing. So blog controller here, new blog, or it is already created, right? So I'm doing a blog dot find by ID and update. I'm passing blog ID, So I will be getting a blog based on that ID, and I'm going to push the new blog, right? New blog object itself. So here we just need to append it. What we are going to enter is inside a $push, it will be an images object, right? An images object, we can specify our all the attributes which we are passing. We just need to take care of the closing sub brackets. So inside images we have a different arguments, like here we are having embedded images. So image URL can be something, so let me just see what it is. Okay, now things are clear. You can just format this code, and there are formatters available. Yeah, this look nice. Now what we are doing is we are doing a find by ID and update. So we are just going to push this new data on images, right? So this images we keep entering the data. So we got the image coming from this. So we might be getting the URL property and image name from there. That should be fine. And here in this new true, I mean, if this record is true, then it will update and it will just create a entry of this. Okay. So when we are hitting it, we are just passing a blog ID, so it is getting that, and it is just updating. First it is doing find by ID and update. So there are many methods available, like find by ID, find by ID and delete, find by ID and remove, find by ID and update. All these methods, these are the utility existing methods which are being provided, right? Okay, so this is the one way. Here what the outcome we are going to get, we are going to have the outcome which we discussed, that it is going to have a nested array, right? So blog is here, just replace it with the images. Here you have an image name and URL or something, and it will just create an array of it. Okay, this is the one way. Now another way is we can just define image collection. Okay, that where it is going to help is we can define the image schema and we just insert it. So that we will take a look on to with the example of blog and comment. So here I have another model, feedback. Let's see, it is a comment or feedback. Okay, I have a username who is doing it, text and created it. Okay, feedback.js. Now what I wanted to do is, if you are creating a multiple feedbacks, then I need to assign that association first of all. So this blog will have a relationship with the feedback. So I just need to create a copy of it here so that we can just associate it for this tutorial. Okay, so blog has the images. Now blog will also have a comments, or you can say feedbacks. This is an array. This is how we define the relationship, and here we can say what is the type of it. Type of it is a mongoose dot schema dot types, I think, dot object ID, and reference. You have to provide the reference of this particular feedback, I mean which particular model you are pointing to. So feedback is my another model. Here this reference is feedback, right? So same need to be placed here in the blog feedback. Now what we are doing is we are maintaining the reference of the feedback IDs in this array. So while getting the blog, what I can do is blog.find.populate feedback. So it will give me all the records, right? In this approach, when we are going to insert the data, what we will do is I will just write that method in the blog controller, is update blog with the feedback. We have already created a blog, update blog with feedback, right? So here we will just get a blog ID, and here we will get a feedback object. Now just take care, because here we need to create a feedback also. So what I will do is I will make this empty. Let's go down. Yeah, So what we are doing is, first we are going to create a feedback object. Okay, so we can just get a feed equal to request dot body, or we are already getting this maybe from the routes, the feedback object which is in the request dot body. So what we can do is, we have to create it first, feedback dot create. This is the model, so we have to import it. Consider that we are importing it. I'm just considering it. Log and feedback, we imported the feedback. Now feedback dot create, you just variable namings, you just need to take care. Maybe we can just do it like this, because it is accepting. Make it just request response based only. So we are getting all these things from request.body, and this feedback ID you are getting in the params, sorry, blog ID. For now we can use destructuring. So I got the blog ID, and whatever you are sending in the payload, I'm considering that as a JSON object. So I'm getting a feedback, so I'm just passing that here. So I got the new feedback. Now I need to just insert this new feedback object ID inside my blog entity, right? So what I can do is a $push, and here I need to just provide the object. Here I have a feedback. Feedbacks is an array, and here this is the new document already created, so I just need to capture ID from here, dot underscore ID. That's it. It's expected. Okay, yeah, now this look clear, right? So what we are doing is, we are now creating updating a blog with the new feedback data you got in the payload, and blog ID you are getting in the request parameter. Based on the blog ID, you are getting that blog, and you are updating, you are just pushing the new feedback into it, and you are getting it. So you can just wrap it around try catch if you want. So if any exception occurs, sorry, next we can use a middleware, and we can just pass error, because this can be further handled, and we will just get a nice message for the error, not stack trace, and the application will not terminate if something goes wrong with this particular query where we are just updating a blog, right? So this is another way. What we are doing, simply updating a blog with the new feedback or new comment which we have received, right? So how it look like is, first we have to trigger this query where we have to create a blog, right? Once the blog is created, we got the blog ID. From the UI, we have to pass blog ID as a request parameter and this payload of a comment. Okay, now while populating it, you can just use dot populate, and you can also populate feedback. And images are already a part of blog. If you just see this blog model, images are just an array, but feedback is a reference. It is maintaining an array of feedback object IDs, so you can populate it. Okay, so there are many type of relationships we have seen. One is to few, like one is to few, one is to many, one is to a lot. When it comes to one is to few, you can just use embedded relationships like blog with images. One is to many. One is to many here, I mean, you can decide either you wanted to go with the reference or embedded one. But one is to too many, a lot. Like blog has a many comments. Then references are the right way of doing it. We just create a two different references, like one is for blog, one is for comment, and comments can also be captured separately, and blog can also be captured separately. You are just managing the references of one another, right? So if we just talk about one more example of schema model of tutorial. Here it can be a blog. So here we have a comments, right? So these relationships can be anything. Here you can provide all different kind of relationships. So this blog has a single category, so it is a 1:1 kind of relationship. relationship, and it has a many comments, right? You can have a blog, maybe author can be another set of object ID, and you can populate all these kind of information while you are fetching a particular blog. So now it has an author, it has a comment, it has a blog. If you want to have the blog can have multiple authors, then you can just make it a this kind of a one is to many relationship. This blog is having one is to many with author, one is to many with comment, and one is to one with category, because we are maintaining only single category object for a particular blog, right? Now it has a one is to one and one is to many combination. Okay, and in the same way, like while creating this, while doing so, if you wanted to update a category, what you will do is you will just assign a category ID to this, right? This is the blog. Inside the blog controller, if I wanted to assign a category to this blog, I will just create a method. Okay, here I will have a method for its implementation, assign category, and here I will be having both the IDs, request dot params dot blog ID maybe, and request dot params blog ID and category ID. So I'm getting both the things in request parameters. Okay, now what I will do, I just need to do the update, right? So update can be done in the same way, find by ID and update, and assign category. It's not a new blog, it's an updated blog, and we are sending updated blog back. So we are just what we are getting, find blog by ID. This is the blog ID, and we are just going to update which particular attribute, category, with the category ID which we got. Right, so what it is updating, it is just assigning a category to this, and you can use a destructuring here. Okay, yeah, so this is all I think about one is to n relationship. There is one more thing is about many is to many relationships, where like a simple example we can talk about is tag, where one many book can have a many tags, and many tags can belongs to a many books, right? So that is another way, and here we are going to have one is to many. So if you just see my book model, here it is going to have a tags, right? So one book is having many tags, and if you just take a look on the tag is having a books and array, right? So it goes either way. It's like a many to many relationship, where many books will have many tags, and many tags will be assigned to many books. Okay, so both will have a reference of one another in form of an array, and whenever you are going to create, if you create a book, then you have to just insert that book in the to update the tag. When you create a new tag, you have to update the tag inside the book. Okay, like here you are creating a new tag. So once the tag is created, you will assign that tag ID, or you will push that tag ID here, and when you created a new book, you have to push that new book ID in the tag array. So you can understand that simply with the controllers. If I just talk about the book controller, okay, so create book and add tag. So whenever you create tag or create book, you have to do some insertion of that book ID or tag ID into respective columns, right? Now we already understood what this code look like, right? So what we are doing is This is the create book. So what it is doing, it is creating a book first. Once the book is created, you got the book ID, so you are passing that book ID and updating the tag. Okay, opposite to it, you are creating a tag, and you got the tag ID from this object, and you are updating a book, right? So this is how you will be able to manage the one is to many relationship. And here, using this way, you can get the data for, like, you can get the many tag for a particular book, or you can get the many book for a particular tag. I mean, many is to many is kind of a rare scenario, and it always confuses a lot of developers that how to define the relationship. And most of the time, it is always one is to many and many is to one, able to solve our problem. But in the extreme case, this is how we can manage it. So in this thing, while populating this data, you can just get the data like this. In the tag controller, you can populate the books. Similarly, in the book controller, you can populate the tags. Like here, I'm populating both the things, author and tag. So books can have many tags, right? Book can have science fictions, psychological book, or some kind of a experimental book, or some kind of a course book, something like this, right? So there is a many to many relationship, and this is how we are managing it. Or you can just pass the IDs of both, book ID and tag ID, and just update, get the book from that, and I just update the tag, push the tag. Or similarly, in the tag controller, I have written the same method, add book to tag. So here you got the book ID and tag ID, you find the tag and update and push the book ID. Okay, I hope I'm able to convey the right message about the MongoDB relationship, how you can manage, how you can define the relationships using just a schema model. What you need to do is, it's not that highly constrained. You have to take care while writing the code. Like one is to many relationships. So first you create a block. Now comments. While creating the comments, you create them separately and just push the comment IDs after. Push the comment IDs by updating the blog. This is how we do it, right? So it's like a operations which are dependent on one another. One book has like one is to many relationship is there. Like one book has a many authors. So first, if you have already created a book entity, now you just create an author and keep pushing the IDs of those authors in the author array in the book entity. Okay, so this is how we can manage the relationship, and I will be just pushing this code, so you can also take a look onto these schema relationships in this particular repository. Okay, if you have any questions, then please just add a comment and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks everyone.